The checkpoint sat at 4,000 feet, and the cold came sideways off the ridge. It was not the kind of cold that apologized. The pine line broke 50 yards east of the gate, and beyond it, the mountain pressed down on the installation like something that had been there long before the army decided to claim it. The guard post was a concrete and steel structure with a retractable barrier arm, 2 cameras mounted high, and a laminated sign that read, "Authorized personnel only," in black letters on yellow. The kind of sign that assumed everyone reading it already knew which side they belonged on. Lieutenant Garrett Pruitt stood at the outer edge of the booth, clipboard in hand, wearing the expression of a man who had decided, sometime in the last 2 years, that controlling who entered a gate was the same as controlling what happened inside it. He saw her before she reached the barrier. She came on foot. No escort vehicle, no base-issue transport. She walked up the access road from the civilian lot, carrying a single dark canvas bag over one shoulder, moving at the kind of pace that covered ground without announcing it. Worn boots, civilian jacket over a plain base layer, hair pulled back under a watch cap. The mountain wind hit her, and she didn't adjust. Pruitt stepped forward. "Ma'am." He put the word in front of her like a barrier of its own. "This is a restricted installation. Civilian access requires advance authorization and an escort on record. I don't have either for you." He looked at the bag, then at her. "I'm going to need to see your identification." She stopped, reached into the inner pocket of the jacket, produced a card, set it on the clipboard he was already holding out, not offering it, not handing it over with deference, just placing it flat on the board, the way you set down something that will speak for itself. Pruitt looked at it. The soldier behind him in the booth, Specialist Adkins, 22, first winter at altitude, glanced through the glass at the card and stopped moving. Pruitt read it twice. The first time, his eyes moved across the card the way they moved across any credential, looking for the format error, the missing seal, the lamination that didn't sit right. That was the reflex. 2 years at a gate teaches a man to look for the flaw before he looks for the rank. The second time, he read it slower. Devon Cross, United States Marine Corps. Veteran, Marine Raider Battalion. The card was not new. The edges had softened the way things soften when they've lived in a pocket for years, not a drawer. The photo was sharp. The face on the photo was the face in front of him, 7 years older, the same stillness in the eyes. Pruitt looked up. She was watching him read it, not impatiently. Not with the tight smile of someone waiting to be acknowledged. She was simply present, the way terrain is present, without needing the moment to go any particular way. He handed the card back. "Ma'am, a veteran ID establishes service history." He kept his voice at the register of someone explaining something to someone who should already know it. "It does not establish current access authorization for a restricted training installation. I still need a current orders document, a base sponsor on record, or an escort cleared to this level." Behind him, Adkins had not gone back to his terminal. Pruitt noticed, didn't address it. "Do you have a current orders document?" She took the card back, returned it to the inner pocket. Then she reached into the canvas bag. Unhurried, the bag set on the ground with one knee catching the weight, and produced a second item. Not a folder, not a printed form, a sealed envelope, dark green. The kind of seal on it that Pruitt had seen twice in his career, and both times on someone else's desk. She held it at her side without extending it. "You wanted identification," she said. "That was the first one." The seal on the envelope was not decorative. It was a wax and foil press, the kind that requires a specific instrument to apply cleanly, and the instrument that applied this one belonged to an office in Washington that did not appear on the base's organizational chart. Pruitt could not have known that from where he stood, but the color and the format, the narrow band of gold thread running beneath the seal, those details lived in a corner of his memory from a mandatory security briefing 18 months ago. He had not expected to see them here. He did not reach for the envelope. Instead, he looked at her hands. The envelope was held at her side, loosely, between two fingers, as if its weight was irrelevant. Her other hand rested flat against the canvas bag. No tension in the wrist. No performance. "I'm not authorized to accept sealed orders at the gate level," he said. "That goes through the installation command office. Standard protocol." "I know the protocol," she said. The wind moved across the checkpoint. One of the barrier cameras rotated a quarter turn on its mount, automatic on a timer, and the faint mechanical sound it made was the only thing in the air for a moment. Adkins had moved to the interior window of the booth. He was not pretending to look at his terminal anymore. Two other soldiers had appeared at the side door of the post building, Corporal Mears and a private whose name Pruitt could never remember on the first week of a rotation. They had come out for a reason neither of them could have articulated. Something about the quality of the silence at the gate had pulled them. Pruitt straightened, shifted the clipboard. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step to the side of the barrier and wait while I contact the duty officer. This isn't a standard intake situation, and I can't clear you without—" "No," she said, not loud, not aggressive. The word arrived the way a door closing arrives. Clean, final, with nothing extra attached to it. Pruitt blinked. "Excuse me? I will not step to the side of the barrier." She said it the same way. "You have seen my veteran credential. You are now holding a sealed authorization. The next step is your duty officer. Make the call from where you are." Mears, at the side door, looked at the private. The private looked at Adkins. Adkins looked at the woman at the gate. Nobody moved. Pruitt made the call. He turned 45 degrees, not enough to present his back to her, which was instinct, not courtesy, and keyed his radio with the thumb press of someone who had done it 10,000 times and was doing it now with less certainty than any of those previous 10,000. Checkpoint 1 to duty office. I have a situation at the main gate. Civilian presenting veteran credential and a sealed envelope, claiming access authorization, requesting duty officer response. The radio returned static, then a voice. Sergeant Delgado, duty office, half a question already forming before the transmission ended. Pruitt answered it, gave the description, kept his voice at the register of a man managing a situation, not reporting one he didn't understand. Devon Cross stood at the barrier and waited. The canvas bag was back on her shoulder. The sealed envelope was no longer visible. Returned to wherever it lived without ceremony the moment Pruitt reached for his radio. She did not check her watch. She did not look at the mountains. She looked at the middle distance, the way people look when they have spent time in places where patience is not a virtue, but a discipline. I know what that stillness costs. I have seen it in people who learned it the hard way, in conditions where moving wrong meant something permanent. It is not calm. It is not indifference. It is control that has been built over years until it fits like a second skeleton. Pruitt had never had to build anything like it, and standing next to it now, he could feel the difference without being able to name it. Adkins had come fully to the window. Mears had not gone back inside. The private, whose name was Ortega, and who had been at this installation for 11 days, stood slightly behind Mears with the expression of someone watching something he would describe to someone else later and not be entirely believed. The radio came back. Delgado confirming. Duty officer was not available. Senior NCO could respond in 15. 15 minutes, Pruitt said, turning back to her. There was something in the way he said it that wanted to be a victory, but couldn't locate the shape of one. Make it the commanding officer, Devon Cross said. Pruitt looked at her. The CO is not dispatched to gate situations, ma'am. She will be for this one. And the way she said she, the same flat, specific delivery as everything else, was when Mears understood that this woman at the gate already knew who commanded this installation, already knew the name, already knew something about this base that the people inside it did not know she knew. Mears stepped back inside the side door and said nothing to anyone, but he picked up his phone. The 15 minutes did not happen. 7 minutes after Pruitt keyed the radio, a vehicle came down the interior access road, not from the duty office direction, but from the command cluster at the north end of the installation. A dark green SUV, moving at the pace of something that had already decided where it was going. It stopped on the inside of the barrier. Colonel Diane Whitlock stepped out. She was 61 years old and wore her rank the way certain people wear it. Not displayed exactly, but present, the way gravity is present. She did not rush to the gate. She walked to it, and the walking was enough. Pruitt came to attention. Whitlock looked past him. She looked at the woman standing at the barrier. Canvas bag, worn boots, watch cap. The mountain cold landing on her exactly the same as it had been landing for the last 9 minutes. And something moved across Whitlock's face that was not surprise. It was closer to recognition, the specific recognition of someone who had been told a name and was now placing a face to it. "Stand easy," she said to Pruitt, without looking at him. She walked to the barrier arm, reached the panel, pressed the release herself. The arm came up. Devon Cross walked through. They met on the inside of the checkpoint, and Whitlock extended her hand first. Devon took it. The handshake was brief, functional, the kind between people who have both been in rooms where handshakes are not ceremonial. "Colonel," Devon said. "Captain Cross." Whitlock used the rank. Not Ms., not ma'am. The rank, the operational rank attached to the sealed authorization, not the veteran credential. "I received the notification from Washington this morning. I was told to expect you by 1400. She glanced at her watch. "You're early." "I had time at the gate," Devon said. "If you want to know when a room changes, watch for that. The moment when the person with the least power in the exchange makes the driest observation, and nobody laughs, because it is not a joke." Pruitt stood 2 meters away and felt the temperature of the situation revise itself entirely. The soldiers behind him felt it too. Ortega, who had been at this installation for 11 days, understood, without anyone explaining it, that he had just watched something that the men around him would remember for the rest of their posting. If you were in this checkpoint when she walked through that barrier, at what exact moment would you have stopped doubting her? Tell me in the comments. The moment, if you are asking. It was not when Whitlock said the rank. It was before that. It was when Devon Cross did not move to the side of the barrier. Whitlock walked Devon Cross through the checkpoint and towards the command building without looking back at Pruitt. This was worse than being addressed. Being addressed means the situation is still open, still negotiable, still a thing that can be managed with the right words in the right order. Being walked past means the situation has already been categorized, filed under a heading that does not include you, and the people doing the filing have moved on to what actually matters. Pruitt stood at the barrier arm and watched them go. Adkins said nothing. Mears said nothing. Ortega looked at the access road until the SUV had pulled back toward the command cluster and the road was empty again. Then Adkins said very quietly, to no one in particular, Marine Raider Battalion. It was not a question. Inside the command building, the hallway that led to Whitlock's office was 40 meters of linoleum and fluorescent light, and the smell of industrial coffee that had been burning since 0600. Devon Cross walked it 2 steps behind Whitlock, taking in the corridor the way she would take in any environment, not looking for decor, looking for layout, exit points, sightlines, the things that told you how a space functioned when it was under stress. The office was corner-facing, 2 windows, a desk with a cleared surface except for a single manila folder and a secure phone. Whitlock closed the door. She did not sit immediately. She stood at the edge of the desk and looked at Devon with the directness of someone who had been briefed on a mission and was now reconciling the briefing with the reality in front of her. "You were at the gate for 9 minutes, she said. "Yes." "Pruitt?" "Yes." Whitlock nodded slowly. Not an apology. A colonel does not apologize to an investigator for a lieutenant's conduct at a gate, but an acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of someone who understands that what happened at the gate is part of what Devon Cross has observed. And observed is exactly the right word, because Devon Cross was not here by accident and had not been at the gate by accident. And the 9 minutes at the barrier were 9 minutes of data that the report would absorb. "Before we begin," Whitlock said, "I want you to understand my position. I have been cooperative with this process since the notification. My staff has been instructed to provide full access. Whatever happened on that ridge in October, I want the accurate record." Devon Cross set the canvas bag on the chair beside the desk, unzipped it, produced the sealed envelope and 2 others she had not shown at the gate. She set them on the desk in a row, left to right. "Then let's start with October," she said. Back at the gate, the barrier arm was down again. Pruitt had lowered it himself, which was the correct procedure, and he had done it with the deliberate movements of a man performing a task he understood in order to avoid thinking about a situation. He did not. Adkins had returned to his terminal. He was typing something or appearing to type something. The keystrokes were slightly too regular, the rhythm of a man producing the impression of work, rather than work itself. Mears had gone back inside without being told. Ortega was at the far end of the post building, facing the pine line, hands in his jacket pockets. Nobody was talking. That was the thing about a checkpoint after something like that. The silence had a different texture than the silence before. Before, it was the silence of a slow afternoon at altitude. Thin air, distant tree noise, the occasional vehicle on the access road. After, it was the silence of people separately processing a shared experience and not yet knowing if it was safe to compare notes. Pruitt set his clipboard on the booth shelf. He picked it up again. He set it down. Adkins, without looking up from the terminal, said, "Sir, the sealed envelope, the gold thread on the border, that's Inspector General's office, federal level." Pruitt did not respond. "I saw it at the SIF briefing last year," Adkins said. "The format, the seal, that's what that was." The wind came off the ridge and moved across the checkpoint and continued east toward wherever wind goes when it is done with a place. "I know what it was," Pruitt said. He did not say anything else. 40 meters up the access road, inside the command building, Devon Cross had opened the first envelope, not the sealed one. She left that on the desk in its row, for the record, for the moment when it would need to be formally acknowledged in the presence of a witness. The first envelope she opened was the one that contained the summary document. 8 pages, single-spaced, the kind of document that does not waste a word, because every word in it had been reviewed by 3 attorneys before it was printed. She placed it on the desk, oriented so Whitlock could read the header. Whitlock read it. Her expression did not change in the way expressions change when someone is surprised. It changed in the way expressions change when someone has been waiting for a specific thing to arrive, and it has now arrived, and the waiting is over, and what comes next is harder than the waiting was. "The October incident," Devon said. "The after-action report filed by this installation listed a navigational deviation as the primary cause of the extraction failure. 14 pages, submitted within 72 hours. Yes, I have a second after-action report." Devon produced it from the canvas bag, placed it beside the first, filed by the team on the ground. 4 pages, submitted within 6 hours of extraction. It does not mention a navigational deviation. Whitlock looked at the 2 documents side by side. "Where did you get that?" she said. "It was transmitted," Devon said. "It was received. It was not included in the installation's formal record." She paused. "That is why I am here." The 2 documents sat on the desk like a before and after. Not of an event, of a story about an event. And the distance between those 2 things, between what happened and what was written about what happened, was exactly the distance Devon Cross had been sent to measure. Whitlock did not touch either document. She moved to the window, stood with her back to the desk for a moment, looking out at the access road, at the pine line beyond the perimeter fence, at the ridge that pressed down on the installation from the north. The same ridge the training exercises used. The same terrain that had been cited in the official after-action report as a contributing factor in the extraction failure. "The team's report," she said without turning. "What does it say was the primary cause?" "Command decision," Devon said. "Specifically, a decision made at the installation level to alter the extraction route 12 hours before the team departed. The team was not informed of the alteration until they were already in the field. The deviation was not navigational. It was instructed." Whitlock turned from the window. "I have sat with that word, instructed, for longer than I want to admit. There is a version of this story where a mistake is just a mistake. Terrain misread, comms interrupted, weather that arrived outside the forecast window. Those stories exist. I have watched them land in rooms like this one, and they land differently. They land with the weight of something accidental. What Devon Cross had placed on that desk landed with the weight of something chosen. That is a different kind of silence. Whitlock came back to the desk. She did not sit. She stood at the edge of it and looked at Devon with something that had moved past the formal acknowledgement of 20 minutes ago into something more unguarded. "Who signed the route alteration order?" she said. Devon opened the canvas bag again, produced a single sheet, the kind of form that carries a signature block at the bottom with a name printed beneath the signature line, so there is no ambiguity about whose hand moved the pen. She placed it on the desk. Whitlock looked at the name. Her jaw set. Not in the way jaws set when someone is angry, in the way jaws set when someone has been hoping, without admitting it, that the answer would be something other than what it is. And now the hoping is finished. "He's still on this installation," she said. "I know," Devon said. "That is also why I am here." Outside on the access road, a vehicle passed, training rotation returning from the upper range. Soldiers in the back of a covered transport, rifles vertical, faces wind-burned from the altitude. None of them knew what was on the desk in the corner office. None of them knew that the woman who had been standing at the gate 40 minutes ago was now sitting with their commanding officer and a piece of paper that was about to change the population of this installation by at least one. The transport passed. The road went quiet again. The name on the route alteration order was Major Conrad Falk. Whitlock said it aloud, not to Devon, to the room or to herself, or to the particular silence that had settled over the desk since she'd looked at the signature block. The way people say a name when they are moving it from suspicion into fact, and the two feel different in the mouth. He submitted the navigational deviation explanation, Whitlock said. "He drafted it," Devon said. "It was submitted through your office." Whitlock's eyes moved to Devon. Sharp, direct. "Through my office does not mean by me." "No," Devon agreed, "it does not. That distinction is part of what I am here to establish." She said it without inflection. Not reassurance, clarity. The investigation was not about Whitlock, and Devon Cross did not deal in false comfort. But she also did not deal in unnecessary pressure on people who were cooperating. Whitlock had been cooperative since Washington. The sealed envelope, the formal one, still sitting in its row on the desk, named her as a cooperating party, not a subject. Whitlock understood the distinction. She had understood it since the notification that morning. What she had not understood until now was the specific shape of what Devon had in that canvas bag. "How complete is your documentation?" she said. "Complete enough that what happens next depends on this installation's response, not on anything I still need to find." Devon paused. "I may need to find additional material here, but the core record is established." Whitlock sat. For the first time since Devon had entered the office, she sat. And the sitting was the gesture of someone who has stopped managing the situation from a standing position, because the situation no longer requires management. It requires decision. "Falk is running the afternoon evaluation on the upper range right now," she said. "He'll be back at 1700. "I know his schedule." Whitlock looked at her. "I reviewed the installation's training calendar before I arrived," Devon said. Simply, as if this were the obvious thing. As if arriving to conduct an investigation without knowing the schedule of the primary subject would be a strange way to conduct an investigation. Whitlock almost said something, then didn't. She pulled the manila folder from the corner of her desk. the one that had been there when they entered, the cleared surface around it, and opened it. Inside was a single printed sheet, Devon's notification order, the one Washington had transmitted that morning, with the authorization level highlighted in yellow by someone who had read it carefully before deciding what it meant for their afternoon. She slid it across to Devon, not as a question, as an acknowledgement. "What do you need from me before 1700? Whitlock said. Devon Cross pulled the canvas bag onto her lap and began methodically to lay out what came next. Devon Cross did not need until 1700. She explained this to Whitlock in the same tone she had used for everything else. Flat, specific, without theatre. The plan was not complicated. Complicated plans assumed variables you could not control. This one was built on variables she had already controlled before she arrived. "Fulk returns at 1700, she said, but the after-action discrepancy becomes a formal matter the moment I file the preliminary finding. I file that now. That triggers the mandatory command notification, which means Fulk is recalled from the range. He comes back on a timeline I set, not one he chooses." Whitlock looked at her. "If you recall him early, he knows something has changed." "Yes." "He'll have time to." "He has had 3 months, Devon said. Whatever he intended to do with that time, he has done it, or he hasn't. Either way, what he does in the next 40 minutes does not change what is on this desk." She opened the canvas bag for the 3rd time and produced a document that was different from the others in one visible way. It had a coloured stripe across the top edge, not a security marking, an administrative one, the kind that indicated the document was active, not archived, live file, not closed record. She set it on the desk, opened it to a specific page, not the first page, not the last, but a page in the middle that she found without searching. The way you find a page you have read enough times that your hands know where it is. "October 14th, she said. 0322 local. The team's lead radio operator transmitted a position update and a route confirmation request. The request logged in this installation's comms record at 0324. It was received. It was not answered." She looked at Whitlock. The team waited 11 minutes for a response on an active extraction. 11 minutes in the field, at night, in contested terrain, waiting for a confirmation that did not come because the route they were asking about had already been altered by an order that nobody had told them existed. The room held that. Whitlock's hands were flat on the desk. Still, "The navigational deviation explanation," Devon continued, "accounts for the 11-minute gap by attributing it to signal interference. There is a comms log entry that supports this." She turned the page. There is also a system timestamp that shows the log entry was created at 07:15 on October 15th. 4 hours after the team was extracted. 4 hours after the incident was already over. If you want this channel to keep delivering stories with this level of pressure and payoff, back it today in the pinned comment. Whitlock looked at the timestamp. She did not speak for a long moment. Then, "Pull Fork from the range." Devon Cross closed the document, reached into the bag one final time, and produced a radio. Not an installation issue unit, her own, encrypted, already set to the frequency she needed. She set it on the desk beside the row of envelopes. "Already requested," she said. "He's on his way." Major Conrad Fork came through the command building side entrance at 16:23. He was still in field gear, jacket unzipped, gloves tucked into the left breast pocket, the particular look of a man who has been running an evaluation and was pulled off it without a full explanation, which meant he had spent the drive down from the upper range building a version of events that he could manage. He had not built the right one. The hallway outside Whitlock's office had 3 people in it when he arrived. Devon Cross, standing to the left of the door. A Staff Sergeant Devon had asked Whitlock to position there as formal witness. And, at the far end of the corridor, Pruitt, who had been summoned from the gate 20 minutes ago without explanation, and who was standing with the stillness of a man who has been told to be somewhere and not been told why, which is a specific and uncomfortable kind of not knowing. Falk saw Whitlock first, through the office window. Then he saw Devon. He did not know her face. That was visible. The half-second of processing, the eyes moving from the civilian jacket to the canvas bag to the row of documents on the desk behind her, visible through the window. The eyes of a man running a calculation. Devon Cross let him run it. "Major Falk," she said. Not a greeting, an identification. Yes. He looked at her, then at the Staff Sergeant, then through the window at Whitlock, who had not moved from her position behind the desk. What is this? A preliminary inquiry meeting, mandatory under Article 32 of the Installation's Operational Review Protocol, triggered by the filing of a preliminary finding this afternoon. She said it the way you say something that has been true for 3 months, regardless of whether anyone in this hallway knew it. "I'm Devon Cross. I've been designated as reviewing officer by the Inspector General's office." Falk looked at Pruitt. The look was fast, a reflex, the kind of glance that checks whether someone else in the room knows what you don't know. Pruitt looked back at him with the expression of a man who had been standing at a gate all afternoon and had already had his own education in not knowing things. No help there. "I'll need to see your authorization," Falk said. He said it to Devon. His voice had the register of someone who has been in enough procedural situations to know that requesting documentation is a legitimate response, and also the register of someone who is hoping, in some portion of himself, that the documentation will have a gap. Devon Cross reached into the inner pocket of her jacket, produced the same worn card she had handed to Pruitt at the gate that morning. Set it in Falk's hand. He looked at it, read it. His expression moved through 2 changes. The first when he saw Marine Raider veteran. The second when he flipped the card and read the operational code on the verso. The code that Pruitt had not been able to decipher at the gate. The one that, to anyone with the right clearance, specified not just Devon's identity, but her authority level and the specific scope of her mandate. Falk's hand did not shake, but he held the card for 1 second too long. Devon Cross took the card back, not reaching for it, simply extending her hand palm up and waiting. Falk placed it there. He did not look at her when he did it. She returned the card to her jacket pocket. "Major Falk," she said, "I have reviewed the after-action documentation for the October 14th extraction, the installation's filed report, and the field team's transmitted report. I have reviewed the comms log for the period between 0322 and 0333 on October 15th. I have the route alteration order from October 13th with the signature block." She said each item the way you set down weight. 1 piece at a time, deliberate, so the person across from you understands how much there is before you are finished. I have a timestamp discrepancy on a log entry that was created 4 hours after the incident it purports to document. She paused, and I have the name on the route alteration order. The hallway was quiet enough that the fluorescent light above them was audible, a faint, persistent hum that had probably been there for years and that nobody noticed until a moment like this one, when every other sound had been evacuated from the space. Falk said, "Any route alteration at that level goes through command review. I was not the only. You were the signing officer." Devon said, "That is a procedural role. The decision, major. One word, flat, final. The same register as no at the gate that morning." Falk stopped. I have very little patience for the version of accountability that begins with "I was not the only." It is not that it is always untrue, it is that it arrives so quickly, faster than the facts, faster than the acknowledgement that something went wrong, that it announces itself as rehearsed. Falk had 3 months. This was the sentence he had been saving. Devon Cross had arrived before he could spend it anywhere useful. She turned to the office door, opened it, gestured for Falk to enter. He entered. At the end of the corridor, Pruitt had not moved. He was watching the office door close behind Falk and Devon, with the expression of a man who arrived at a scene he thought he understood, and is now understanding it in a different register entirely. The staff sergeant took a position beside the door. Inside the office, Whitlock was standing again. The 3 envelopes were still in their row on the desk. The documents were open. The radio was where Devon had left it. Everything in the room was exactly where Devon Cross had placed it, and the arrangement had the quality of something that had been built, patient, specific, load-bearing, before anyone in this building had seen her face. Falk looked at the desk. "Sit down, Major," Whitlock said. It was the first time she had spoken since he entered the building. Falk sat. He sat the way men sit when they are choosing where to put their hands and cannot find a position that does not feel like a tell. He settled on flat palms on his thighs, which was the position of someone who has decided that stillness is safer than movement, and is not entirely wrong about that. Devon Cross remained standing. She did not use the desk as a barrier between them. She stood to the side of it in the open space between the desk and the window, so that Falk had to look slightly up and to his left to see her, and Whitlock was directly in his sight line to the right. 2 points of authority. No comfortable middle distance to rest his eyes. "October 13th, Devon said. 1451 local. A route alteration order was generated for the October 14th extraction. The order modified the team's egress route at the 3rd waypoint, moving the extraction vehicle rendezvous from grid reference Delta 7 to grid reference Echo 2. She picked up the route alteration form from the desk, held it so Falk could see his own signature at the bottom. Echo 2 placed the team in an exposed corridor for an additional 400 meters, in terrain that had been flagged in the pre-mission assessment as having elevated contact risk. Falk looked at the form. "That alteration was made for logistical reasons," he said. "The primary vehicle had a mechanical issue. Echo 2 was the available. The vehicle log for that date shows the primary extraction vehicle was operational," Devon said. "It ran a test drive at 1400, 51 minutes before the alteration order was signed." The fluorescent hum above them continued its patient work. Falk's jaw moved. Not speech, the preparation for speech that doesn't arrive. At the far end of the installation, something was moving that Falk could not see, and Devon Cross had already accounted for. The staff sergeant outside the office had a radio on the same encrypted frequency as Devon's unit on the desk. 2 minutes ago, without anyone in the office being aware of it, a second message had gone out. Not to a vehicle, not to a range, but to the duty office. A formal notification that the preliminary inquiry was active and that a witness assembly had been requested for the command briefing room at 1700. Standard procedure for a preliminary finding at this authorization level. The witness assembly meant soldiers, specifically the senior NCOs of the affected unit, the installation's JAG representative, and any personnel named in the filed documentation. Pruitt's name was in the filed documentation. Not as a subject. As an observed party, the gate incident had been logged the moment Devon Cross stepped through the barrier, because Devon Cross logged everything from the moment she arrived, and the log had been time-stamped and transmitted before Whitlock's SUV had finished turning around on the access road. Back in the office, Devon set the route alteration form on the desk. "Major Falk," she said, "the comms log entry that attributes the 11-minute response gap to signal interference. Walk me through when that entry was created." Falk said, "I don't have the specific timestamp memorized." "I do," Devon said. "Oh, 7:15, October 15th. Would you like to tell me what you were doing at 07:15 on October 15th? The room waited. Whitlock did not move. Falk looked at the desk, at the documents, at the row of envelopes. His eyes moved across the arrangement the way eyes move across terrain when they are looking for a route out and finding that every route has already been accounted for. "I want to speak with JAG," he said. "JAG will be present at 1700, Devon said. "You have 41 minutes. The 41 minutes passed the way time passes in rooms where something irreversible is already in motion. Not slowly, not quickly, but with the particular weight of duration that cannot be bargained with. Devon Cross used them. She did not use them on Falk, who had gone silent in the way people go silent when they have requested legal counsel, and understand that speaking further is the specific kind of mistake that compounds other mistakes. She used them on the documentation. Sitting at the corner of Whitlock's desk with the canvas bag open, she worked through the remaining material in the order she had planned before she arrived, cross-referencing the field team's transmitted report against the installation's filed version, marking the discrepancies with a red tab, building the physical record that the 1700 meeting would need to be more than a conversation. Whitlock watched her for a while, then picked up her own phone and made 3 calls. The JAG representative, the senior NCO of the affected unit, and the installation's administrative officer. Each call was brief. Each ended with the same instruction. 1700, command briefing room, mandatory attendance. Outside the office, in the corridor, the staff sergeant had been joined by a second soldier. A master sergeant named Okafor, who had appeared without being summoned, the way certain senior NCOs appear when they sense the administrative weather changing, moving toward the source of it, the way experienced people move toward the thing they need to understand, rather than away from the thing they want to avoid. Okafor had looked through the office window, had seen Falk sitting with his palms on his thighs and Devon Cross working at the desk, had seen the row of envelopes, had seen the red tab documents accumulating beside the canvas bag. He had not asked the staff sergeant any questions. He had simply taken a position in the corridor and stayed there. At 16:58, Devon Cross closed the canvas bag. She capped the red marker, stacked the tabbed documents in order. Field report on top, installation report beneath it, route alteration form 3rd, comms log with the timestamp 4th, and aligned the stack's edges with the corner of the desk. The way you align something that is about to be carried into a room full of people who will need to see it clearly. She stood, looked at Falk. "Major," she said, "before we go in, I want you to understand something about how this works. The preliminary finding I filed this afternoon documents the discrepancies. It does not, at this stage, determine cause or assign final accountability. That happens through the formal process." She paused. "What happens in the next hour determines how that process goes. Cooperation looks different from obstruction in a final report. That is not a threat. It is information." Falk looked at her for the first time since he had requested JAG. He did not speak. Devon Cross picked up the stack of documents, tucked it under her left arm, picked up the canvas bag with her right hand, looked at Whitlock. "Colonel," she said. Whitlock opened the office door. In the corridor, Okafor straightened. The staff sergeant moved. Pruitt, who had been standing at the far end of the hallway for the better part of an hour, looked at the open door and at the people coming through it, and understood, in the specific, clarifying way that understanding arrives when you have been waiting for it without knowing you were waiting, that the 9 minutes at the gate that morning had been the beginning of something, not a separate incident, not a procedural inconvenience, but the opening of something that had been moving toward this corridor since before he had ever seen Devon Cross walk up the access road. She passed him without looking at him. Not dismissal, not performance. She was looking at the door at the end of the corridor, the one that led to the command briefing room, and the looking had the quality of someone who has already been in that room in their mind many times and is now simply closing the distance between the plan and the fact of it. The command briefing room held 22 people at capacity. At 1704 minutes, it held 17. The senior NCOs of the affected unit occupied the left side of the long table. 4 men, 1 woman, all in field gear or service uniform, all with the specific posture of people who have been told this is mandatory and have arrived without knowing exactly what this is. The JAG representative, Captain Reyes, the installation's legal officer, a compact man with reading glasses already on, sat at the near end. The installation's administrative officer stood at the back wall. Okafor had taken a chair against the side wall, outside the formal seating arrangement, which was where master sergeants often positioned themselves when they wanted to watch a room rather than participate in it. Pruitt sat at the far end of the table from the door. He had been directed there by the staff sergeant, which meant he was the last person to see anyone enter, and the first person visible to anyone who did. It was not a comfortable position. He was beginning to understand that a number of things he had experienced today, that he had initially categorized as incidental, were in fact structural. Devon Cross entered last. She set the tabbed document stack at the head of the table, not at a seat, at the standing position, the position from which the room is addressed. She set the canvas bag on the floor beside it. She did not arrange her materials further. Everything was already in the order she needed. She looked at the room. If you had to judge only one person in this room right now, who earns respect and who loses it? Put your answer in the comments. Thank you for being here, she said. I'll be brief on the context and specific on the substance. You can ask questions at the end. Jag will advise on anything I flag as pending formal process. She looked at Reyes, who nodded once. My name is Devon Cross. I have been designated as reviewing officer by the Inspector General's office under a standing authority for operational after-action discrepancy review. I filed a preliminary finding this afternoon. This meeting is the mandatory command notification that follows that filing. She picked up the field team's after-action report from the top of the stack, held it so the room could see it. On October 14th, a 4-person extraction team transmitted a field after-action report within 6 hours of returning from a compromised extraction. That report is 4 pages. It identifies the primary cause of the compromise as a route alteration that was communicated to the team during an active field operation after the team had already departed. She set it down, picked up the installation's filed report. The installation's formal after-action report is 14 pages. It identifies the primary cause as a navigational deviation. She held both documents up, side by side. The room looked at them. The senior NCO at the middle of the left side of the table. A sergeant first class named Tarver, who had been on this installation for 3 years and who had been in the field on a different operation on October 14th and had heard the extraction account from the team directly in a barracks conversation that nobody had written down. Looked at the 2 documents and then at the table in front of him, and did not look up again for a long moment. He recognized the gap. He had always recognized the gap. He had not known there was a piece of paper that also recognized it. Devon Cross set both documents on the table. I am going to walk through the specific discrepancies, she said. This will take approximately 20 minutes. At the end, I will explain what the preliminary finding recommends and what the formal process looks like from here. She looked at Falk, who was sitting to the right of the JAG representative, which was exactly where Whitlock had placed him. Major Falk is a named party in the finding, she said to the room. He has been advised of his rights and has requested legal counsel. Captain Reyes will be advising him throughout this meeting. Then she picked up the first tabbed page and began. She started with the comms log, not because it was the most damaging piece, because it was the most legible one, the kind of evidence that does not require interpretation, only reading. Numbers on a page, a timestamp that said one thing, and a sequence of events that said another. The gap between them was 4 hours and 13 minutes, and 4 hours and 13 minutes is not a rounding error. It is not a clerical delay. It is a choice. Devon read the log entry aloud. The time of the purported signal interference, the duration, the notation that attributed the 11-minute response gap to environmental factors. She read it in the same tone she had used for everything else. Not prosecutorial, not dramatic, simply accurate. The way you read something when you want the words to carry their own weight without assistance. Then she read the system timestamp. Oh, 7:15, she said. October 15th. The log entry that documents a signal interference event occurring at 0322 was created at 0715. 4 hours and 13 minutes after the event, it purports to document. She set the log on the table. The room processed this in the way rooms process something that reframes everything that came before it. not loudly, not with visible reaction, but with a quality of stillness that is different from the stillness of people waiting for information. This was the stillness of people who have received information and are now deciding what it means for everything they thought they already knew. Sergeant First Class Tarver, at the middle of the table, looked at the log. He had heard the team's account in the barracks, the 11 minutes, the silence on the comms, the decision the team lead had made to move anyway, because waiting any longer was its own kind of risk. He had heard it the way you hear things that live in the space between the official record and the actual experience of the people who were there. He had filed it in that space, had assumed it would stay there. The document on the table said it would not. He looked at Devon Cross. She was already moving to the next page. "The route alteration order," she said. "October 13th, 1451. She held it up, then laid it flat on the table so the room could see the signature block. The alteration moved the team's extraction rendezvous from Delta 7 to Echo 2. The stated reason on the order is primary vehicle mechanical failure. She picked up the vehicle maintenance log. The primary vehicle ran a test drive at 1400 on October 13th. The maintenance log records it as fully operational. That log entry was created at 1408, 43 minutes before the route alteration was signed. The JAG representative made a note without looking up from his pad. Falk was looking at the table in front of him. His hands were no longer flat on his thighs. They were clasped, fingers interlaced on the tabletop, and the knuckles had the color of hands that are being held still by decision rather than relaxation. I do not think the worst thing in that room was the evidence. The worst thing was the certainty behind the falsification. The assumption that a 4-hour gap in a timestamp would not be found, that a vehicle log would not be pulled, that the field team's transmitted report would stay buried in a comms archive that nobody would think to request. That kind of certainty does not come from one bad decision. It comes from a pattern of smaller decisions that each went unchallenged, until the person making them stopped being able to imagine the room where they would have to account for them. Devon Cross had built that room, and she had arrived at its gate that morning carrying a worn ID card and a canvas bag, and a lieutenant had told her she didn't belong there. She picked up the final tabbed document. "I have one more item," she said. "Then I'll open for questions." The final tabbed document was a single page, not a form, not a log. A written communication, the kind generated by the installation's internal messaging system, time-stamped, sender and recipient identified at the header. Devon set it on the table without holding it up. She placed it flat, oriented toward the room, and stepped back so that the people closest to it could read the header without her having to read it for them. Tarver leaned forward, read the sender line, read the recipient line. He sat back. He did not say anything, but he looked at Falk with an expression that was not anger. Anger would have been simpler. It was the expression of a man recalibrating a relationship he thought he understood, locating the specific point where the thing he trusted had been something other than trustworthy, and finding that point was further back than he had thought. Devon read the communication aloud. It was dated October 12th, the day before the route alteration order. It was a 9-line message, and it was addressed to the installation's logistics coordinator, and its content, read plainly without interpretation, was a request to document a mechanical issue with the primary extraction vehicle for the October 14th operation, for the purpose of establishing a logistical basis for a route modification that had already been decided. The vehicle issue was requested before it was documented. The alteration was decided before the justification for it was created. Devon set the page down. The preliminary finding, she said, identifies 3 specific discrepancies: the timestamp on the comms log entry, the vehicle log versus the route alteration order, and this communication. She looked at the room. The finding recommends a formal Article 32 investigation. That recommendation goes to the Inspector General's office with today's documentation package. The formal process begins from there. She looked at Whitlock. Whitlock stood from her position at the side of the table. She straightened. The room felt the shift. Not a change of topic, a change of register. What had been Devon Cross's briefing was becoming Whitlock's command response. And the distinction mattered, because one was investigative and the other was institutional. And both were now pointed in the same direction. "Effective immediately," Whitlock said. "Major Falk is relieved of his duties pending the outcome of the formal investigation. He is restricted to quarters until further notice. Captain Reyes will facilitate." She looked at Reyes, who was already closing his notepad. "Senior NCOs, your units will be briefed through normal chain of command as the formal process allows. Nothing discussed in this room leaves this room without JAG clearance. Is that understood?" A collective acknowledgement. Some verbal, some nods, all immediate. Whitlock looked at Devon Cross. "Reviewing Officer Cross," she said. The formal title. Not Captain. Reviewing Officer. The title attached to the sealed authorization. The one that named the full scope of Devon's mandate. The installation will provide full cooperation with the formal process. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. Devon nodded once. She began collecting the tabbed documents from the table. Field report, installation report, route alteration, comms log, the 9-line communication here. Stacking them in order, efficiently, the way she did everything. No theatre in the closing, just the work of someone who has done what they came to do and is now accounting for the materials. At the far end of the table, Pruitt was very still. He was watching Devon Cross collect her documents, and he was thinking, with a clarity he had not had at 9 that morning, about a woman who had walked up an access road carrying a canvas bag and a worn ID card, and had stood at a barrier and said no when he told her to step aside, and he was understanding, completely finely, without any remaining ambiguity. What kind of person says no like that, and means it without needing to raise her voice? Falk left the briefing room between Reyes and the staff sergeant. He walked the way men walk when they have been reduced, not physically diminished, but structurally. The rank still on his collar, the gear still on his body, but the relationship between those things and the space around him had changed in a way that everyone in the corridor could read without being told what had happened. Okafor, still positioned at the side wall, watched him pass without expression. The 2 soldiers who had been standing near the door moved aside without being asked. Nobody said anything. That was the texture of it. Not loud, not theatrical, just the specific silence of an institution making an adjustment. The way a structure settles after a weight has been removed from a point where it was never supposed to be bearing. Devon Cross came out of the briefing room last. She stood for a moment in the corridor, canvas bag over one shoulder, the tabbed document stack under her arm. The hallway had the particular quality of a space that has held something significant and is now returning to its ordinary dimensions. The fluorescent light above continued its patient hum. Whitlock came to stand beside her. "The second envelope," Whitlock said, quietly, meaning the one from the row on the desk, not the sealed authorization, not the summary document. The middle one, the one Devon had not opened during the meeting. "Yes," Devon said. "What's in it?" Devon looked at the corridor, at the door at the far end, which led back to the access road, and the gate, and the pine line, and the mountain beyond it. She had arrived through that gate that morning. She would leave through it. "A list," she said. Whitlock waited. "Of the other installations where the same alteration pattern appears in after-action documentation." Devon shifted the canvas bag on her shoulder. October 14th was not the first time. The corridor held that. Whitlock's expression did not change in the visible way, but something behind it did. The specific internal adjustment of a commanding officer who has been cooperating with an investigation in good faith and has just been told that the investigation is larger than the installation she commands, and that her cooperation, correct as it was the beginning of a process she cannot see the end of from where she stands. "How many?" Whitlock said. "3, Devon said. "Over 14 months. Different units, different terrain, same structural pattern. A route or timing alteration made late, justified retroactively. Documented to account for an outcome rather than to prevent one." She looked at Whitlock. "This installation is the third," she said. "It is also where the pattern was cleanest, where the documentation was most complete on both sides, the field team's report and the installation's version. That is why the preliminary finding was filed here first." Whitlock absorbed this. "The other 2 installations," she said, "are reviewing officers already assigned. They will be notified this week." Whitlock nodded, slowly, the nod of someone who is recalibrating the scale of something without losing composure. Because composure is what she has, and it is what the situation requires. And she has been doing this long enough to know that the time to lose composure is never, not even now. "You came in through my gate this morning," she said. "Yes." "Pruitt." "Yes. I'll address that separately." "I've already filed the observation," Devon said. "Standard entry log. It will be part of the record." She paused. "It does not require further action on your part. The log is factual. It documents what occurred. The record will show that the gate conduct was inconsistent with the installation's stated access protocols." Another pause. "It will also show that the commanding officer responded appropriately and in a timely manner." Whitlock looked at her. "That is also in the record," she said. "Everything is in the record," Devon said. Whitlock walked Devon back to the gate. Not protocol, not required. A choice. The specific choice of a commanding officer who understands that the thing that happened at the gate that morning is part of the record, and that how it closes is also part of the record, and that some things need to be witnessed to be complete. They came down the access road on foot, side by side, in the late afternoon light that arrived at 4,000 feet, with the particular flatness of a sun that is still above the ridge, but has already decided to leave. The pine line was darker now. The mountain had not changed. The checkpoint came into view. Pruitt was there. he had returned to his post after the briefing room, which was also protocol, also required, the gate still needed to function regardless of what had happened inside the command building, and he was standing at the outer edge of the booth with his clipboard and his expression of a man who is performing his duties with great precision. Because precision is the only thing available to him right now. Adkins was at the terminal. Mears was at the side door. Ortega was at the far end of the post building. The same configuration as that morning. Everything was the same, and nothing was the same. Whitlock stopped at the inner edge of the checkpoint, at the position where the barrier arm hung in its lowered state. Devon stopped beside her. The late light caught the edge of the canvas bag, the worn collar of the jacket, the watch cap that had been on her head since she walked up the access road. And the overall quality of her standing at the gate again was the quality of something that had arrived, done what it came to do, and was now returning the way it came, unchanged by what the place had tried to tell it about itself. Whitlock reached out. "Your identification," she said. Not a request, a formality, the formality of the record. The gate log would show Devon Cross exiting the installation with the same credentials she had used to enter, confirmed by the commanding officer. Devon produced the card. Whitlock took it. She looked at it, the front, which Pruitt had read that morning. Then the verso, the code that Pruitt had not been able to decipher. She read it aloud, not loudly, but clearly, the way you read something when you want the words to exist in the air of a specific space, at a specific moment, for the specific people who are present. If this episode gave you something real, you can return that energy through the support option in the pinned comment. The code on the verso was a 6-character alphanumeric sequence, followed by a designation. The designation was 3 words. Whitlock read all 3. Inspector General, Reviewing Authority. She handed the card back to Devon. Then she turned to face the checkpoint. To face Pruitt and Adkins and Mears and Ortega at the far end, who had all gone absolutely still in the particular way that people go still when a commanding officer turns to address them. And the address is going to be about something that happened in their presence. "This morning," Whitlock said, "Reviewing Officer Cross arrived at this installation with valid credentials and a sealed authorization from the Inspector General's office. She was detained at this gate for 9 minutes. She looked at Pruitt. "The gate log has been updated to reflect the nature of her authorization. The incident has been documented as part of the operational record." A pause. "That documentation will be reviewed as part of this installation's compliance assessment." Pruitt was at attention. His face was the face of a man who has been standing at a gate all day and has arrived by a route he did not choose at a version of himself that he will be living with for longer than today. "Reviewing Officer Cross," Whitlock said, turning back to Devon, "is cleared to exit. Gate, confirm." Adkins at the terminal confirmed. The barrier arm came up. Devon Cross walked through it. She did not look back. The barrier arm came down behind her. The sound it made, the hydraulic press of the mechanism returning to its locked position, was the same sound it made 100 times a day at this gate. Mechanical, impersonal. The gate did not know what had passed through it. The soldiers did. Pruitt remained at attention for 4 seconds after Whitlock turned back toward the command building. 4 seconds is a long time to hold a position when there is no one left to hold it for. Then he came down from it. Not dramatically, just the quiet physical return of a man stepping out of a posture that had been required and is no longer. And he stood at the edge of the booth with his clipboard and looked at the access road where Devon Cross was walking back toward the civilian lot. She moved at the same pace she had moved that morning, ground covered without announcement, the canvas bag over her shoulder, the watch cap against the cold, the mountain at her back. Adkins watched from the terminal. He did not look at Pruitt, which was the most tactful thing he had done all day, because looking at Pruitt right now would require acknowledging the full shape of what had happened. And Adkins was young enough to understand that some acknowledgements are better made later, privately, when the person who needs to receive them has had time to be something other than the version of themselves that made the mistake. Mears, at the side door, turned and went back inside without a word. Ortega watched Devon Cross until she reached the civilian lot, watched her put the canvas bag in the back of a plain dark sedan, watched her get in, watched the sedan pull out and take the service road south toward the main highway, moving at the pace of someone who has somewhere to be and knows how to get there. Then he went back inside too. The gate was quiet. The mountain was the same mountain it had been that morning. The pine line was the same pine line. The cameras on their mounts rotated on their timers. The sign that read, "Authorized personnel only," in black letters on yellow was still there, still assuming the same things about who knew which side they belonged on. Pruitt stood at the edge of the booth for a long moment. Then he picked up his clipboard, set it down. Inside the command building, in the corner office, Whitlock sat at her desk. The row of envelopes was still there. Devon had left them, sealed authorization and all, because they were part of the installation's record now. The tabbed documents were gone, in the canvas bag. The vehicle log was gone. The comms log was gone. The message from October 12th was gone. What remained on the desk was the manila folder, the one that had been there when they entered. Inside it, the notification order from Washington, the authorization level still highlighted in yellow. Whitlock looked at it for a moment. Then she opened the second envelope, the middle one from the row, the one she had asked Devon about in the corridor. The list, 3 installations, 14 months. The same pattern, 3 times, in 3 different places, each one documented to account for an outcome rather than prevent one. She folded the list carefully, set it back in the envelope, picked up the secure phone. The call she was about to make was not to Washington. It was to the commanding officers of the other 2 installations. Professional courtesy, the kind that says it is coming your way and you should be cooperative when it arrives, and if you are not, the record will show that too. She dialed. Devon Cross took the service road south. The road ran along the base of the ridge for 4 miles before it met the main highway, and for those 4 miles there was nothing on either side but pine and rock and the occasional survey marker that someone had planted years ago, and that the mountain had been slowly absorbing back into itself. She drove at a consistent speed, both hands on the wheel, the heated seat she had not turned on. She did not replay the day. That was a habit she had built over years. The discipline of not narrating to yourself what has already happened, because the narration costs time, and the time belongs to what comes next. The day was in the record. The record would do its work. What Devon Cross needed to do now was file the preliminary findings transmission confirmation, update her travel log, and be in a different state by 0700 tomorrow. The second installation on the list was 600 miles northeast. She had already booked the route. Behind her, at the installation, the word was moving the way words move in closed environments. Not announced, not broadcast, but present. The senior NCOs who had been in the briefing room had returned to their units. They had not said anything they were not cleared to say. But they had said nothing with a specific quality that communicated everything. The tight jaw, the careful eye contact, the deliberate way of not answering when someone asked why Falk was being escorted to quarters. Tarver had gone back to his unit's day room and sat there for a while with a cup of coffee he did not drink, thinking about a barracks conversation from October that he had filed in the space between official record and actual experience. That space was smaller now. The field team's report had done what field reports are supposed to do, which is tell the truth about what happened in the field, and it had done it 6 hours after an extraction, and then sat in a comms archive for 3 months until a woman from the Inspector General's office had driven to a mountain base and walked up an access road on foot and said no when a lieutenant told her to step aside. In the barracks of the affected unit, a corporal who had been on the October extraction was sitting on his bunk filling out a form. Routine, unrelated. When his sergeant came in and closed the door and sat across from him and said very quietly that there was going to be a formal process, and that the formal process was going to want a statement from anyone who had been on that operation. The corporal looked at the form in his hands, put it down. "About time," he said. The sergeant nodded. Neither of them said anything else for a moment, and the moment had the quality of two people sharing a weight they had been carrying separately, without acknowledging they were carrying it, for long enough that they had stopped noticing how heavy it was. The weight had not gone away, but something about it had shifted. The carrying of it was different now, not lighter exactly, but purposeful. It was going somewhere. It had a direction. At the gate, Pruitt was still on duty. 3 more hours until his rotation ended. He checked vehicles. He logged entries. He operated the barrier arm. He did his job with the precision of someone for whom precision was, right now, the only available form of dignity. The mountain held its position above the installation, indifferent and permanent, the way mountains hold their positions above everything that happens at their base. The sedan reached the main highway. Devon Cross turned south. The installation at night was different from the installation in the afternoon. Not quieter. Bases at altitude are never truly quiet. There is always a generator, always a perimeter light humming its cold arc into the dark. Always the sound of wind finding the edges of structures it has been finding for years. But the quality of the noise changed after dark. It became functional rather than ambient. The sounds of a place doing what it does rather than being what it is. Pruitt's rotation ended at 2000. He logged his final entry, handed the gate over to the night watch. Specialist Candler, who had heard enough in the last 3 hours from Adkins and Mears to have a partial picture that was already more accurate than comfortable, and walked the access road back toward the barracks, without stopping at the duty office, without checking his messages, without doing any of the things a man does when he wants to talk about his day. He did not want to talk about his day. The barracks hallway was lit and quiet. 2 soldiers passed him going the other direction. Neither of them said anything. He could not tell if they knew, and he could not tell which was worse, that they knew or that they didn't yet, because the ones who didn't yet would know by morning, and the ones who already knew had chosen not to say anything, and both of those were their own specific kind of acknowledgement. He sat on his bunk, did not remove his jacket for a long moment, sat with the particular stillness of a man who has been making a kind of sense of the world all day. The sense that a gate is a gate, that authorization is authorization, that a woman in civilian clothes walking up an access road does not belong at a restricted installation any more than anyone else who hasn't been cleared, and has arrived at the end of that day understanding that the sense he was making was wrong, and that it was wrong not because he had applied the rules incorrectly, but because the rules were the smallest part of what happened, and he had treated them as the largest. In the day room, 2 doors down, Tava was still there. He had moved from the chair to the window. He was looking at the access road, or the place where the access road was, which from the day room window at night was mostly dark, with a line of perimeter lights marking the perimeter fence, and at the far end, the gate booth with its lights still on. He was thinking about the field team, about the corporal on that bunk right now, giving a statement that was 3 months overdue, about the 11 minutes, about the way the team had described it, not with anger, not in the barracks conversation, just with the flat, specific language of people reporting what happened. We waited. We got no response. We moved because waiting was going to cost us more than moving. The flat, specific language of people who had been making decisions in the dark based on information that had been altered before it reached them. I have watched silence win more fights than shouting ever did. The silence of that barracks in October, when the team came back and said what they said and nobody wrote it down. The silence of the archive where the field report sat for 3 months. The silence at the gate this morning when Devon Cross said no, and Pruitt had nothing left to say to it. All of it the same silence, in different rooms, doing the same work. Accumulating, patient, waiting for someone to arrive with a canvas bag and a worn ID card and the specific discipline not to raise her voice. Tava turned from the window. He went to his desk, opened the drawer, took out a yellow legal pad, his own, not installation issue, and wrote the date at the top. Then he began to write what he remembered from October. Not for the formal process, not because anyone had asked, because it was the kind of thing that needed to exist somewhere in someone's handwriting, where it had not existed before, and because the woman who had walked through the gate that morning had made it possible to write it without feeling like it would disappear into the same space where the field report had disappeared. He wrote for 40 minutes. Then he put the pad in the drawer and went to bed. By the next morning, the installation knew, not through announcement, not through a briefing or a memo or anything that moved through official channels. Those channels were still processing. JAG was still advising. The formal process was doing what formal processes do, which is move with deliberate care through the documentation that someone had already done the work of assembling. The official word would come in its time. The unofficial word had already arrived. It moved the way these things move in closed environments, person to person, in the specific shorthand of people who share a space and have developed, over months or years, the ability to communicate significant information in a very small number of words. A look, a particular way of not looking, the absence of a name from a conversation where the name would ordinarily appear. Falk's name was absent from every conversation that morning. Not because he was forbidden. The JAG guidance was specific about what could and could not be discussed, and his name was not forbidden. It was absent because the people who would ordinarily have said it had nothing left to say with it. It was a name that had stopped being a handle for a person and become a handle for a situation. And situations do not make good conversation. In the motor pool, 2 mechanics were running the morning vehicle checks. One of them, a specialist named Gaines who had worked on the primary extraction vehicle on October 13th and had noted its operational status in the maintenance log at 14:08, was doing his check with a thoroughness he had always applied, but was applying more deliberately this morning. Not because he thought something was wrong with the vehicles, because thoroughness right now felt like the correct response to the last 24 hours, and he could not entirely have explained why, only that it did. In the mess hall, the corporal from the extraction team was eating breakfast across from 2 soldiers who had not been on the operation, and who asked, in the way soldiers ask about things they have heard pieces of, what was going on with the inquiry. The corporal looked at his tray, then at them. "There's a process," he said. "It's the right process. Let it work." He said it without heat, without satisfaction. The way you say something when it is true and simple. And the simplicity of it is the only thing that needs to be communicated. The 2 soldiers nodded, did not ask more. In the administration office, the installation's senior clerk, Staff Sergeant Wilder, who had been in administration long enough to have seen the documentation of 3 COs and 2 Inspector General visits, and whose institutional memory was, by this point, a significant resource for anyone who needed to understand how this installation functioned, was reviewing the entry logs from the previous day, specifically the gate log, specifically the 9-minute entry. She read it twice. Then she updated the installation's access protocol checklist with a note, not an official amendment, a working note, the kind that gets discussed at the next protocol review meeting, that read, "Sealed IG authorization. Do not hold at gate level. Escalate immediately to CO." It took her 45 seconds to write. It was the most consequential 45 seconds of paperwork the installation had produced in months. Outside, the mountain was the same mountain. The perimeter fence ran its usual line. The gate booth had Candler finishing the night rotation and the day watch arriving. Someone new, a PFC 3 weeks into the posting, who would hear about yesterday from Adkins or Mears or Ortega before lunch, and who would file it in the category of things you learn at a new posting that change how you understand where you are. The installation was not the same installation it had been the previous morning. It looked exactly the same. 3 days after Devon Cross left the installation, the formal notification arrived at the other 2 bases. Not from Whitlock. She had made the courtesy calls, which were informal, which were professional, which were the kind of communication that says prepare yourself without saying, here is what is coming. The formal notification came from Washington, from the Inspector General's office, on the letterhead with the seal that Adkins had recognized at the gate, and that Pruitt had not been able to name until he looked it up that night on his bunk, jacket finally off. The installation quiet around him. The letter was brief, 3 paragraphs. The first established authority. The second identified the scope. The third named a date. Each installation received the same letter. Each CO read it and made a call. To JAG. to their administrative officer, to the person they trusted most in their command structure, depending on who they were and how they operated. One of those calls, at the second installation, was made to a legal team outside the military structure, which was within rights, and which was also a data point that Devon Cross had anticipated and had already noted as a likely response in her working file. She was in a motel room 600 miles northeast when the notifications went out, running the second installation's documentation through the same process she had used at the first. Field reports, after-action records, comms logs, the particular architecture of a cover built from small choices that each seemed defensible in isolation and became something else in aggregate. The pattern was there. She had known it would be. The canvas bag was different now, lighter. The first installation's materials filed, the second installation's materials accumulating. The yellow legal pads she used for working notes had new pages. The encrypted radio was on the same frequency. The worn ID card was in the inner pocket of the jacket, which was hanging on the back of the motel room door. Back at the first installation, Whitlock had convened the first formal command review since the preliminary finding. The affected unit's senior NCOs were present. Tarver had his yellow legal pad with him, not to read from, just because it existed, and its existence was now part of what he knew about himself, and what he was willing to do with what he knew. The review was procedural, documentation, chain of command, the gap between what was reported and what was filed. But underneath the procedure was something that procedure rarely carries: an actual reckoning. The specific discomfort of people who inhabit a system examining the places where the system had been used against its own purpose, and deciding collectively that they were the system, and the system's behavior was their behavior, and their behavior was going to change. It was not comfortable. Comfort was not the point. In the admin office, Wilder's working note on the access protocol had been reviewed by the installation's XO, who had scheduled a full protocol review for the following week. The note was already being cited in the prep materials. 45 seconds of paperwork, moving forward. At the gate, the day watch was running its checks. The barrier arm was functional. The cameras were on their timers. The sign in black and yellow was still there. Everything looked the same. Everything had already changed. 6 days after Devon Cross left the first installation, a package arrived at the Inspector General's office in Washington. Standard mail. Certified. Return address. The installation's base post office, which meant it had been sent from inside the perimeter, which meant someone on the inside had decided to send it. The package was logged, processed, forwarded to the reviewing officer's active file. Devon Cross's file, which was one of 4 active files on the IG floor that week, and the only one that had generated a certified package from a base address. Devon was at the second installation when the notification came through on her encrypted line. She read the package description. Weight, approximately 0.5 kilogram. Contents per sender declaration. Personal correspondence and supplementary documentation, voluntarily submitted. Sender, Sergeant First Class R, Tarver, U.S. Army. She set the phone down on the motel desk, looked at the wall for a moment, the specific quality of looking at a wall that is not about the wall, that is about something you did not anticipate, and that has arrived in the category of things that confirm a calculation you made without being certain you were right to make it. She had not asked Tarver for anything. had not addressed him directly in the briefing room, had not known, when she filed the preliminary finding, that there was a senior NCO who had been carrying a barracks conversation from October in the space between the official record and what actually happened. The canvas bag had been lighter since she left. She had not noticed until now that it had also been carrying something she had not packed into it. The weight of what the installation would do after she was gone, which is always the part you cannot control, which is always the part that determines whether the work means anything beyond the documentation. Tava had sent his legal pad. If this hit you the way it hit me, leave your verdict in one sentence. Comments are open. She picked up the phone again, opened her working file for the first installation, added a note, one line, administrative, that the voluntary submission had been received and would be incorporated into the formal record. Then she closed the file. Outside the motel window, the second installation's perimeter fence was visible in the middle distance, its lights coming on as the afternoon light dropped. Tomorrow morning, she would walk through that gate. She had already reviewed the access protocol documentation for this installation. Different format, same authority. And she already knew the gate officer's rotation schedule and the name of the CO and the specific shape of the discrepancy in the after-action record, which here was not a timestamp, but a personnel log. A different kind of gap, the same structural pattern. She had 3 yellow legal pads left. She expected to use 2 of them. In her jacket pocket, in the inner fold where it always lived, the worn ID card sat with its edges softened from years in that pocket, and its photo sharp and its verso code legible to anyone with the right clearance. She had presented it twice since October. Once at a different facility, as part of a prior review that had closed cleanly, and once at a mountain gate where a lieutenant had taken it and looked at it twice and handed it back and told her she still needed current orders. She had needed nothing of the kind. She had needed exactly what she had: the card, the canvas bag, the sealed envelopes, and the discipline to stand at a barrier and not move when someone told her to step aside. The perimeter lights completed their sequence. The second installation settled into its evening configuration. Devon Cross opened the next yellow legal pad to the first page and wrote the date at the top and began. The second gate was different from the first. Not in structure, checkpoint, barrier arm, cameras on mounts, the same sign in black and yellow that installations across this country use to tell people which side they belong on. But in what happened when Devon Cross walked up the access road, with her canvas bag over one shoulder, and produced the worn ID card at the request of the gate officer. The gate officer, a staff sergeant named Hollins, 11 years of service, who had been briefed 3 days earlier when the formal notification arrived from Washington, and who had updated his own working knowledge of sealed IG authorizations accordingly. Looked at the card for 2 seconds. Then he looked at the verso. Then he stood back from the barrier panel, reached for the release, and said, "Reviewing Officer Cross, welcome to the installation. Colonel Estes is expecting you." The barrier arm came up. Devon Cross walked through. She did not note the difference on her working log. She noted it in the other way, the way that does not produce documentation, that lives in the category of things you observe and absorb without writing down, because the writing is not the point of them. The point of them is that they happened. The point of them is that the same card, the same worn edges, the same code on the verso produced a different result in a different place, and the difference was not in the card. The difference was in whether the people at the gate had been taught what they were looking at. 43 days after that, the formal Article 32 investigation at the first installation produced its initial findings. Devon Cross was not present for the announcement. She was at the third installation by then, the last one on the list, the farthest from Washington, tucked into terrain that was different from the mountain base, but carried the same quality of altitude and isolation that seems to attract the particular kind of institutional error she had been following across 14 months. She had one yellow legal pad left. She was on its third page. The findings at the first installation were delivered in the command briefing room, the same room where Devon had stood at the head of the table and read the timestamp aloud and set the two after-action reports side by side. Whitlock was present, Tarver was present, the JAG representative was present, the senior NCOs of the affected unit were present. Falk was not. The findings named him as the responsible party for the route alteration and for the post-incident documentation discrepancy. They recommended formal charges under the UCMJ. They cited the voluntary submission from Tarver as corroborating material. They noted, in the section on institutional factors, that a reviewing officer had been detained at the installation's main gate for 9 minutes upon arrival, and that this incident had been logged and incorporated into the installation's compliance assessment. Pruitt's name appeared in a footnote. The footnote did not recommend charges. It recommended additional training on IG authorization protocols and a formal review of the gate's procedural documentation. A footnote, not a charge, not a career ending. A note. The kind that lives in a record and does its quiet work for years. The kind that becomes relevant the next time a decision is being made about a posting or a promotion, and someone pulls the file and reads it and understands, in the specific way that files communicate things that conversations don't, what kind of judgment this person brought to a gate on a cold afternoon at 4,000 feet. Pruitt would read the findings. He would read the footnote. And he would understand, not for the first time, but for the first time with the full weight of documentation behind it, that the woman who had walked up the access road that morning had known, before she set the card on his clipboard, exactly what the footnote was going to say. The third installation took 9 days. Devon Cross left it on a Thursday morning. The last yellow legal pad filled to its final third, the canvas bag carrying a new set of tabbed documents that would join the formal record in Washington by the following week. The third installation's discrepancy was the cleanest of the three. A personnel log altered to remove a name from a planning meeting that had, in fact, occurred with that name present. Simple, legible, the kind of falsification that assumes nobody will pull the original attendance record against the log. Devon had pulled the original attendance record. She drove south from the third installation the same way she had driven south from the first. Consistent speed, both hands on the wheel, the road doing what roads do, which is get you from one place to another if you stay on them. The mountains were different here, lower, older, the kind that have been worn down by more time than the northern range, and carry their age in the color of the rock rather than the sharpness of the line. She thought about Tarver's legal pad, not the contents. She had read those in Washington during a 12-hour layover between the first and second installations, sitting in a conference room with the package open on the table. The contents were what she had expected. A detailed, specific, chronologically ordered account of what Tava had observed and heard in October, written in the plain declarative language of someone who had been paying attention for a long time, and finally had a place to put what he'd been carrying. What she thought about was the act of sending it. Nobody had asked, nobody had suggested it. Tava had made a decision, alone, in a day room, with a legal pad and a pen, and the understanding that the thing he was writing was going somewhere real this time. Not into the space between the official record and the actual experience of the people who were there, but into the official record itself, through the front door, certified mail, return address on the envelope. If you want the next episode to hit even harder, you can fuel that in the pinned comment right now. There are people who wait to be asked. And there are people who understand without being asked that what they know is needed and that the time for carrying it quietly has passed. Tava was the second kind. He had been the second kind in October too. He had just not had anywhere to put it yet. Devon Cross had given him somewhere to put it. Not by asking, by arriving, by standing at a gate and saying no, and walking through a barrier with a canvas bag and doing, methodically and completely, what she had been sent to do. The work created the conditions. The conditions allowed the truth to move. She reached the highway junction, took the East Fork, the route back to the airport, to Washington, to the desk where the formal findings from all three installations would eventually converge into a single record that would be read by people in offices whose names she did not know, and whose decisions she could not control, and whose judgment she was, in the end, trusting to do with the record what the record deserved. That was the work, not the confrontation, not the gate, not Falk's hands on his thighs, or the timestamp, or the two after-action reports side by side on the table. Those were the evidence. The work was what the evidence made possible, the correction, the accountability, the change in a protocol note that took 45 seconds to write and would prevent the next Devon Cross from standing at a barrier for 9 minutes before the right person arrived to raise the arm. She drove east. The mountains fell away behind her. She stopped at a rest, area 70 miles east of the third installation. Not for fuel. The tank was 3/4 full. Not for food. She pulled off because the highway had a long straight section ahead, and long straight sections at altitude, in the late afternoon, with the sun at the specific angle that turns windshields into mirrors, require a break in the driving that has nothing to do with fatigue and everything to do with the particular kind of accumulated weight that does not announce itself until you are moving and then announces itself all at once. She parked, turned the engine off. The rest area was small. 2 picnic tables, a covered structure with a map of the state mounted behind scratched plexiglass, a trash receptacle, a view of the lower range to the west. No other vehicles. The wind was lighter here than at altitude, the kind of wind that moves through a valley without committing to any particular direction, carrying pine smell and the faint diesel echo of a truck that had passed 10 minutes ago and was now somewhere ahead of her on the highway. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. Then she reached into the inner pocket of the jacket, took out the card. She held it the way she always held it, loosely between 2 fingers, its weight irrelevant. The edges were soft. The photo was sharp. She had carried this card for 7 years, through 3 reviews, 2 facility assessments, a prior IG assignment that had closed cleanly, and 1 mounting gate at 4,000 feet, where a lieutenant had taken it from a clipboard and read it twice and handed it back and told her she still needed something more. She looked at the front. Devon Cross, United States Marine Corps, veteran, Marine Raider Battalion. The photo was 7 years old. She looked at it the way you look at a photograph of yourself from a period that is genuinely past, not with distance, not with nostalgia, but with the specific recognition of a person who knows the distance between that version and this one has been earned rather than accumulated. The 7 years were in the card the same way they were in the softness of the edges. Present, integrated, not something that had happened to her, but something she had moved through deliberately, each year adding to what the card meant without changing what it said. She turned it over. The verso code was the same 6 characters it had always been, followed by the 3-word designation that Whitlock had read aloud at the gate in the late afternoon light, with Pruitt at attention and Adkins at the terminal and Mears at the side door, and Ortega at the far end, who had been at this installation for 11 days and would remember this afternoon for the rest of his career. Inspector General, Reviewing Authority. She looked at it for a moment. Not long. The looking was not about the card. The card was just a card, a credential, a physical object that did the work of communication in the moments when communication needed to be concrete and legible, and impossible to misread. The looking was about what the card had required of her, what it had always required. The discipline of walking up an access road on foot, in civilian clothes, without escort, without announcement, and standing at a barrier and being told to step aside and saying no, and meaning it without raising her voice. Because raising your voice is what you do when you are not certain. And Devon Cross was certain, had been certain since the moment she read the preliminary documentation, and understood what had happened in October and what the record needed her to do about it. The card had required her to be exactly what she was. That was the whole of it. She returned it to the inner pocket of the jacket, started the engine, pulled back onto the highway. 70 miles ahead, the road curved east and flattened, and the mountains gave way to the kind of terrain that has no opinion about who crosses it. Open, indifferent, the way ground is when it has not been claimed by altitude or named by any particular institution. She drove through it without stopping. The formal record closed 4 months after Devon Cross walked through the gate at the first installation. 3 preliminary findings. 3 Article 32 referrals, 1 formal charge at the first installation. Falk on 2 counts of documentation falsification and 1 count of conduct unbecoming. 2 administrative findings at the other installations, less clean than the first, the discrepancies more distributed across a chain of decisions that made individual accountability harder to establish, but institutional accountability impossible to avoid. The protocol review at the first installation was completed 6 weeks after Devon's visit. The new access guidelines for sealed IG authorizations went into effect immediately. Gate officers at 3 installations received updated briefings. The briefing materials cited, without naming her, a specific incident in which a reviewing officer had been detained at a gate for 9 minutes due to inadequate protocol training. 9 minutes. In a briefing. In a footnote. In a protocol document that would be read by every gate officer at those installations for the next decade. and that would, each time it was read, do its quiet work of preventing the next 9 minutes from happening. I will be honest about what this costs, not the investigation. The investigation has a process, a timeline, a set of outcomes that are at least partially predictable from the documentation. What costs something is the discipline of arriving at a gate alone and being told you don't belong there. And knowing that the response to that is not anger, and not volume, and not the immediate production of every credential you carry, but stillness, the specific load-bearing stillness of someone who has been here before, in different terrain, under different skies, and has learned that the moment is always the same moment, and the response that works is always the same response. Stand where you are, say what is true, and let the institution catch up to you. Devon Cross had learned that in the Marine Raiders. She had learned it before that, in terrain that did not have a name on any military map. The landscape of being looked at and not seen, of being assessed before being known, of having to be twice as certain and half as loud to occupy the same professional space as people who had never had to calculate the cost of either. She had learned it the way you learn anything that matters, by doing it repeatedly until the doing of it cost less than the not doing, until it was no longer a strategy, but a posture, not a choice made in the moment, but a condition of how she moved through rooms and gates and corridors and the long straight highways between installations. The card in her pocket was not what made her who she was. It was the record of who she had already been. There is a version of this story that ends with Pruitt, with the footnote in the findings, the additional training, the protocol review that cites his gait without naming him, with a man sitting on a bunk with his jacket still on, understanding something about himself that he cannot unlearn. That version is true, and it matters, and it is part of what happened. But it is not the center. The center is not the gate. The center is not the lieutenant who was wrong about what he was looking at. The center is not even the investigation. 3 installations, 14 months, the timestamps and the vehicle logs, and the route alteration orders assembled in tabbed stacks that Devon Cross carried in a canvas bag across 600 miles of highway between one mountain and another. The center is what the investigation required of the person conducting it. Whitlock had said it without intending to, in the corridor outside the command briefing room, after Falk had been escorted to quarters, and the staff sergeant had taken his position by the door, and the installation had begun its slow institutional adjustment to what the afternoon had contained. You came in through my gate this morning. Yes, on foot. No escort, no announcement. Carrying a canvas bag and a worn credential and 3 sealed envelopes, and the specific knowledge that the 9 minutes at the gate were going to be part of the record, regardless of how they resolved. Because Devon Cross logged everything from the moment she arrived, and the moment she arrived was the moment she stepped out of the sedan in the civilian lot and began walking up the access road. She had known, before she reached the barrier, that Pruitt was going to tell her to step aside. Not because she knew Pruitt, she had never seen him before that morning, but because the gate was the gate, and the gate at that kind of installation, on that kind of afternoon, with someone who looked the way Devon Cross looked arriving the way Devon Cross arrived, was always going to produce a version of that response. Not malice, necessarily. Not even conscious disrespect. The weight of assumption, the reflex of a man who has been taught, by 100 small confirmations, that the person who walks up an access road alone without escort does not belong there, and that his job is to enforce that assumption until someone with more authority tells him otherwise. If this channel matters to you, turn that feeling into action through the pinned comment. Devon Cross had been the someone with more authority. She had always been the someone with more authority. The gate had not known it. The gate would know it next time, and the time after that, and the time after that. Because the protocol note existed now. Because the footnote existed. Because the briefing materials existed. Because 45 seconds of paperwork and 40 minutes of legal pad and 9 minutes at a barrier at 4,000 feet had produced a record that was now part of how this institution understood itself. Permanently, specifically, in the way that records are permanent, which is to say, available to anyone who knows to look and impossible to unwrite. The mountain had not changed. The installation had. 6 months after the gate, a package arrived at Devon Cross's field office in Washington. No return address. Postmarked from the first installation's base post office. The same post office Tava had used. Inside the package was a single item. A laminated photograph 4 by 6 inches, taken from a distance with what was probably a phone camera on a cold afternoon. The image was slightly compressed by distance, but legible. It showed the gate. Specifically, it showed the gate at the moment the barrier arm was coming up. Caught mid-rise, the hydraulic arm at a 45-degree angle. The checkpoint lights on, the pine line dark behind it, the mountain pressing its weight into the upper quarter of the frame. And in the foreground, walking through the gap, canvas bag over one shoulder, watch cap, civilian jacket, the particular posture of someone covering ground without announcing it. Devon Cross, seen from behind, already moving through, no note, no name, no explanation of who had taken it or why they had decided to send it. She looked at it for a long time. Not at herself. You cannot see much of a person from behind at that distance. Just the shape of them, the direction of them, the fact of their movement through a space that had tried to hold them. She looked at the arm, the 45-degree angle of it, the specific geometry of a barrier mid-rise, not fully open yet, not closed, caught in the act of changing from one state to the other. She set the photograph on her desk. Next to it, she set the worn ID card. She looked at both of them. The arm in the photograph, the card on the desk, the two objects that had occupied opposite ends of the same morning. One trying to hold the line, one carrying what the line could not account for. This is what the work looks like from the outside. A photograph of a barrier arm at 45 degrees. A card with soft edges and a sharp photograph, and a code on the back that says 3 words. It does not look like much. It is not supposed to look like much. The work that matters rarely does. It arrives quietly, on foot, without escort, carrying what it needs to carry and nothing more. And it stands where it is told to step aside, and it does not step aside, and eventually the arm comes up. Not because the arm wants to, because the arm has no choice once the record exists. Devon Cross picked up the ID card, returned it to the inner pocket of the jacket, hanging on the back of her chair, picked up the photograph, held it for 1 more second. The arm at 45 degrees, the figure in the foreground already through, already moving, the mountain behind it unchanged and permanent and entirely indifferent to what had happened at its base. She put the photograph face down in the top drawer of her desk, opened the drawer below it, took out a new file. The cover page had a date, a location, and a case number. A fourth installation. She opened it. The gate never remembers. The record does, and the record is why she keeps walking. That was not a comeback. That was a correction.